Section 1 of Heart, a Schoolboy's Journal. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Heart, a Schoolboy's Journal by Edmondo de Amicis. Translated by Isabel Florence Hapgood. Preface. This book is specially dedicated to the boys of the elementary schools between the ages of 9 and 13 years, and might be entitled The Story of a Scholastic Year written by a pupil of the 3rd class of an Italian municipal school. In saying written by a pupil of the 3rd class, I do not mean to say that it was written by him exactly as it is printed. He noted day by day in a copybook, as well as he knew how, what he had seen, felt, thought, in the school and outside the school. His father at the end of the year wrote these pages on those notes, taking care not to alter the thought, and preserving, when possible, the words of his son. 4 years later the boy, being then in the Lyceum, read over the MSS, and added something of his own, drawing on his memory, still fresh, of persons and of things. Now read this book, boys. I hope that you will be pleased with it, and that it may do you good. Edmondo de Amicis. End of section 1. Section 2 of Heart, a Schoolboy's Journal. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Heart, a Schoolboy's Journal by Edmondo de Amicis. Translated by Isabel Florence Hapgood. October, Part 1. The First Day of School. Monday, 17th. Today is the first day of school. The 3 months of vacation in the country have passed like a dream. This morning my mother took me to the Baretti schoolhouse to have me enter for the 3rd elementary grade. I was thinking of the country and went unwillingly. The streets were swarming with boys. The 2 bookshops were thronged with fathers and mothers who were purchasing bags, portfolios, and copybooks, and in front of the school so many people had collected that the beadle and the policeman found it hard to keep the entrance clear. Near the door I felt myself touched on the shoulder. It was my master of the 2nd grade, cheerful as usual, and with his red hair ruffled. He said to me, "So we are to part forever, Enrico?" I knew it well, yet the words pained me. We made our way in with difficulty. Ladies, gentlemen, women of the people, workmen, officials, nuns, and servants, all leading boys with one hand and holding the promotion books in the other, filled the anteroom and the stairs, making such a buzzing that it seemed like entering a theatre. I was glad to see once more that large room on the ground floor, with the doors leading to the 7 classes, where I had passed nearly every day for 3 years. There was a throng of teachers going and coming. My schoolmistress of the 1st upper class greeted me from the door of the classroom and said, "Enrico, you're going to the floor above this year. I shall not even see you pass by any more." And she gazed sadly at me. The principal was surrounded by women who were much worried because there was no room for their sons, and it struck me that his beard was a little whiter than it had been last year. I found the boys had grown taller and stouter. On the ground floor, where the divisions had already been made, there were little children of the 1st and lowest sections who did not want to enter the classrooms and who pulled back like donkeys. They had to be dragged in by force, and some ran away from the benches. Others, when they saw their parents leave, began to cry, and the parents had to go back and comfort them or take them away, while the teachers were in despair. My little brother was placed in the class of Mistress Delcati. I was put with Master Perboni, upstairs on the 1st floor. At 10 o'clock we were all in our classes, 54 of us, only 15 or 16 of my companions of the 2nd class among them, De Rossi, the one who always gets the first prize. The school seemed so small and gloomy to me when I thought of the woods and the mountains where I had passed the summer. I thought again, too, of my master in the 2nd class, who was so good, and who always smiled at us, and who was so small that he seemed to be one of us, and I grieved that I should no longer see him with his tumbled red hair. Our present teacher is tall, he has no beard, his hair is grey and long, and he has a straight line running crosswise on his forehead. He has a big voice, and he looks at us fixedly, one after the other, as though he were reading our very thoughts, and he never smiles. I said to myself, this is my first day. There are 9 months more. What work, what monthly examinations, what weariness! I wanted to see my mother when I came out, and I ran to kiss her hand. She said to me, "Courage, Enrico, we will study together." And I returned home content. But I no longer have my master with his kind, merry smile, and school does not seem so nice to me as it did before. Our master, Tuesday, 18th. I like my new teacher too, since this morning. While we were coming in, and when he was already seated, some of his scholars of last year every now and then peeped in the door to salute him. They would present themselves and greet him. "Good morning, Senor Teacher." "Good morning, Senor Perboni." Some came in, touched his hand, and ran away. It was plain that they liked him, and would have been glad to return to him. He responded, "Good morning," and shook the hands which were held out to him, but he looked at no one. At every greeting his smile remained serious, with that deep wrinkle on his brow, with his face turned towards the window, and staring at the roof of the house opposite, and instead of being cheered by these greetings, he seemed to suffer from them. Then he looked at us closely, one after the other. While he was dictating, he got down and walked among the benches. Catching sight of a boy whose face was all red with little pimples, he stopped dictating, took the lad's face between his hands and examined it. Then he asked him what was the matter with him, and laid his hand on his forehead to feel if it were hot. Meanwhile, a boy behind him got up on the bench and began to play the marionette. The teacher turned around suddenly. The boy sat down at one dash and remained there, with head hanging, in dread of being punished. The master placed one hand on his head and said to him, "Don't do so again." Nothing more. Then he returned to his table and finished the dictation. When he was done, he looked at us a moment in silence. Then he said very, very slowly, with his big but kind voice, "Listen. We have a year to pass together. Let us see that we pass it well. Study and be good. I have no family. You are my family. Last year I had a mother. She is dead. I am left alone. I have no one but you in all the world. I have no other affection, no other thought than you. You must be my sons. I wish you well, and you must like me too. I do not wish to be obliged to punish anyone. Show me that you are boys of heart. Our school shall be a family, and you shall be my comfort and my pride. I do not ask you to give me a promise. I am sure that in your hearts you have already answered yes, and I thank you." Just then the beadle came in to announce the close of school. We all left our seats as quietly as could be. The boy who had stood up on the bench went up to the master and said to him in a trembling voice, "Forgive me, Signor Master." The master kissed him on the brow and said, "Go, my son." An accident. Friday, 21st. The year has begun with an accident. On my way to school this morning I was repeating to my father the words of our teacher, when we noticed that the street was full of people who were pressing close to the door of the schoolhouse. Suddenly my father said, "An accident! The year is beginning badly." We passed through with some difficulty. The big hall was crowded with parents and children, whom the teachers had not succeeded in placing in the classrooms, and all were turning towards the principal's room, and we heard the voice, "Poor boy! Poor Robetti!" Over their heads, at the end of the room, we could see the helmet of a policeman and the bald head of the principal. Then a gentleman with a tall hat entered, and all said, "That is the doctor." My father inquired of a master, "What has happened?" "A wheel has passed over his foot," replied the latter. "His foot has been crushed," said another. He was a boy belonging to the second class, who, on his way to school through the Dora Grossa street, seeing a little child of the lowest class who had run away from its mother fall down in the middle of the street a few paces from an omnibus which was bearing down upon it, had hastened forward boldly, caught up the child, and placed it in safety. But, as he had not withdrawn his own foot quickly enough, the wheel of the omnibus had passed over it. He was the son of a captain of artillery. While we were being told this, a woman entered the big hall, like mad, and forced her way through the crowd. She was Robetti's mother, who had been sent for. Another woman hastened towards her and flung her arms about her neck with sobs. It was the mother of the baby who had been saved. Both flew into the room, and a desperate cry made itself heard. "Oh, my Giulio! My child!" At that moment a carriage stopped before the door, and a little later the director made his appearance, with the boy in his arms. The latter leaned his head on his shoulder, with pallid face and closed eyes. Everyone stood very still. The sobs of the mother were audible. The director paused a moment, quite pale, and raised the boy up a little in his arms, in order to show him to the people. And then the masters, mistresses, parents, and boys all murmured together, "Bravo, Robetti! Bravo, poor child!" And they threw kisses to him. The mistresses and boys who were near him kissed his arms and hands. He opened his eyes and said, "My satchel!" The mother of the little boy whom he had saved showed it to him, and said amid her tears, "I will carry it for you, my dear little angel. I will carry it for you." And in the meantime she bore up the mother of the wounded boy, who covered her face with her hands. They went out, placed the lad comfortably in the carriage, and the carriage drove away. Then we all entered school in silence. The Calabrian Boy. Saturday, 22nd. Yesterday afternoon, while the master was telling us the news of poor Robetti, who will have to go on crutches, the director entered with a new pupil, a lad with a very brown face, black hair, large black eyes, and thick eyebrows which met on his forehead. He was dressed entirely in dark clothes, with a black morocco belt round his waist. The director went away, after speaking a few words in the master's ear, leaving beside the latter the boy, who glanced about with his big black eyes as though frightened. The master took him by the hand and said to the class, "You ought to be glad. Today there enters our school a little Italian born in Reggio, in Calabria, more than 500 miles from here. Love your brother who has come from so far away. He was born in a glorious land, which has given illustrious men to Italy, and which now furnishes her with stout laborers and brave soldiers, in one of the most beautiful lands of our country, where there are great forests and great mountains, inhabited by people full of talent and courage. Treat him well, so that he shall not feel that he is far away from the city in which he was born. Make him see that an Italian boy, in whatever Italian school he sets his foot, will find brothers there." So saying, he rose, and pointed out on the wall map of Italy the spot where lay Reggio, in Calabria. Then he called, "Ernesto de Rossi!" The boy who always gets the first prize. De Rossi rose. "Come here," said the master. De Rossi left his bench and stepped up to the little table, facing the Calabrian. "As the head of the class," said the master to him, "give a welcome to this new companion, in the name of the whole school, the embrace of the sons of Piedmont to the son of Calabria." De Rossi embraced the Calabrian, saying in his clear voice, "Welcome," and the other kissed him impetuously on the cheeks. All clapped their hands. "Silence!" cried the master. "We don't clap hands in school." But it was clear that he was pleased, and the Calabrian was pleased also. The master gave him a place and went with him to the bench, and then he said again, "Bear well in mind what I have said to you. In order that this case might occur, that a Calabrian boy should be as though in his own house at Turin, and that a boy from Turin should be at home in Calabria, our country fought for 50 years, and 30,000 Italians died. You must all respect and love each other, but any one of you who should give offense to this comrade, because he was not born in our province, would render himself unworthy of ever again raising his eyes from the earth when he passes the tricolored flag." Hardly was the Calabrian seated in his place when his neighbors presented him with pens and a picture, and another boy from the last bench sent him a Swiss postage stamp. My schoolmates, Tuesday, 25th. The boy who sent the postage stamp to the Calabrian is the one I like best of all. His name is Garrone. He is the biggest boy in the class. He is about 14 years old. His head is large, his shoulders broad. He is good, as one can see when he smiles, but it seems as though he always thought like a man. I already know several of my classmates. Another one I am taken with is named Coretti, and he wears chocolate-colored trousers and a catskin cap. He is always jolly. He is the son of a huckster of wood, who was a soldier in the War of 1866, in the squadron of Prince Umberto, and they say that he has 3 medals. There is little Nelly, a poor hunchback, a weak boy, with a thin face. There is one who is very well dressed, who always wears fine Florentine plush, and is named Votini. On the bench in front of me there is a boy who is called Muratorino, the little mason, because his father is a mason. His face is as round as an apple, with a nose like a small ball. He possesses a special talent. He knows how to make a hare's face, and they all get him to do it, and then they laugh. He wears a little ragged cap, which he carries rolled up in his pocket like a handkerchief. Beside Muratorino sits Garoffi, a thin, long, silly fellow with the nose and beak of a screech owl and very small eyes, who is always trading in little pens and images and matchboxes, and who writes the lesson on his nails in order that he may read it on the sly. Then there is a young gentleman, Carlo Nobis, who seems very haughty. He is between 2 boys I like, one the son of a blacksmith, clad in a jacket which reaches to his knees, who is pale, as though from illness, who always has a frightened air and who never laughs. The other with red hair, who has a withered arm and carries it hung in a sling from his neck. His father has gone away to America, and his mother goes about peddling potherbs. And there is another curious fellow, my neighbor on the left, Stardi, small and thick-set, with no neck, a gruff fellow who speaks to no one, and doesn't seem to understand much, but stands watching the master without winking, his brow lined with wrinkles and his teeth set, and if he is questioned when the master is speaking, he makes no reply the first and second times, and the third time he gives a kick. And beside him there is a bold, cunning face, belonging to a boy named Franti, who has already been expelled from another district. There are in addition 2 brothers who are dressed exactly alike, who resemble each other to a hair, and both of whom wear caps of Calabrian cut, with a peasant's plume. But handsomer than all the rest, the one who has the most talent, who will surely be the head this year also, is De Rossi, and the master, who has already perceived this, always questions him. But I like Precossi, the son of the blacksmith, the one with the long jacket, who seems sickly. They say that his father beats him. He is very timid, and every time that he addresses or touches anyone, he says, "Excuse me," and gazes at them with his kind, sad eyes. But Garrone is the biggest and the best. A generous deed. Wednesday, 26th. It was this very morning that Garrone let us know what he is like. When I entered the school a little late, because the mistress of the upper first had stopped me to inquire at what hour she could find me at home, the master had not yet come, and 3 or 4 boys were teasing poor Crossi, the one with the red hair, who has a dead arm and whose mother sells vegetables. They were poking him with rulers, hitting him in the face with chestnut shells, and making him out to be a cripple and a monster by mimicking him with his arm hanging in the sling. And he, alone on the end of the bench and quite pale, was gazing now at one and now at another with beseeching eyes, that they might leave him in peace. But the others mocked him worse than ever, and he began to tremble and to turn red with rage. All at once, Franti, the boy with the bad face, sprang upon a bench, and pretending that he was carrying a basket on each arm, he aped the mother of Crossi when she used to come to wait for her son at the door, for she's ill now. Many began to laugh loudly. Then Crossi lost his head, and seizing an inkstand, he hurled it at the other's head with all his strength, but Franti dodged, and the inkstand struck the master, who entered at the moment, full in the breast. All flew to their places, and became silent with terror. The master, quite pale, went to his table, and said in a stern voice, "Who did it?" No one replied. The master raised his voice and said again, "Who was it?" Then Garrone, moved to pity for poor Crossi, rose abruptly and said resolutely, "It was I." The master looked at him and at the stupefied scholars, then said in a quiet voice, "It was not you." And after a moment, "The guilty one shall not be punished. Let him rise." Crossi rose and said, weeping, "They were striking me and insulting me, and I lost my head and threw—" "Sit down," said the master. "Let those who provoked him rise." 4 rose and hung their heads. "You," said the master, "have insulted a companion who have given you no provocation. You have scoffed at an unfortunate lad. You have struck a weak person who could not defend himself. You have committed one of the basest, the most shameful acts with which a human creature can stain himself. Cowards!" Having said this, he came down among the benches, put his hand under Garrone's chin, as the latter stood with a drooping head, and having made him raise it, he looked him straight in the eye and said, "You are a noble soul." Garrone profited by the occasion to murmur something in the ear of the master, and he, turning towards the 4 culprits, said abruptly, "I forgive you." Section 3 of Heart, a Schoolboy's Journal. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Heart, a Schoolboy's Journal, by Edmondo de Amicis. Translated by Isabel Florence Hapgood. October, Part 2. My Schoolmistress of the Upper First, Thursday 27th. My schoolmistress kept her promise, and came today, as I was on the point of going out with my mother to carry some linen to a poor woman recommended by the Gazette. It was a year since I had seen her in our house. We all made a great deal of her. She is just the same as ever, a little thing, with a green veil wound about her bonnet, carelessly dressed, and with untidy hair because she has not the time to adorn herself, but with a little less colour than last year, with some white hairs, and a constant cough. My mother said to her, "And your health, my dear mistress? You do not take sufficient care of yourself." "It doesn't matter," the other replied with her smile, at once bright and sad. "You speak too loud," my mother added. "You exert yourself too much with your boys." That is true. Her voice is always to be heard. I remember how it was when I went to school to her. She talked and talked all the time, so that the boys might not lose their attention, and she did not remain seated a moment. I felt quite sure that she would come, because she never forgets her pupils. She remembers their names for years. On the days of the monthly examinations, she runs to ask the director what marks they have won. She waits for them at the entrance, and makes them show her their compositions, in order that she may see what progress they have made, and many who are now in the grammar school and wear long trousers and a watch still come to see her. Today she had come back in a great state of excitement from the picture gallery, whither she had taken her boys, just as she had conducted them all to museum every Thursday in years gone by, and explained everything to them. The poor mistress has grown still thinner than of old, but she is always brisk, and always becomes animated when she speaks of her school. She wanted to have a peep at the bed on which she had seen me lying very ill 2 years ago, and which is now occupied by my brother.
She gazed at it for a long while and couldn't speak. She was obliged to go away soon to visit a boy belonging to her class, the son of a saddler, who is ill with the measles, and she had besides a package of sheets to correct, a whole evening's work, and she had still a private lesson in arithmetic to give to the mistress of a shop before nightfall. "Well, Enrico," she said to me as she was going, "are you still fond of your schoolmistress now that you do hard sums and write long compositions?" She kissed me and called up once more from the foot of the stairs, "You are not to forget me, you know, Enrico." Oh, my kind teacher, never, never shall I forget you. Even when I grow up I shall remember you and shall go to seek you among your boys, and every time I pass near a school and hear the voice of a schoolmistress, I shall think that I hear your voice, and I shall recall the 2 years I passed in your school, where I learned so many things, where I so often saw you ill and weary, but always earnest, always indulgent, in despair when anyone was clumsy with his pen, trembling when the examiners asked us questions, happy when we made a good showing, always kind and loving as a mother. Never, never shall I forget you, my teacher. In an attic. Friday, 28th. Yesterday evening I went with my mother and my sister Sylvia to carry the linen to the poor woman recommended by the newspaper. I carried the bundle. Sylvia had the paper with the initials of the name and the address. We went up to the very roof of a tall house and through a long corridor with many doors. My mother knocked at the last. It was opened by a thin, fair woman who was still young, and it instantly struck me that I had seen her many times before, with that very same blue kerchief that she wore on her head. "Are you the person of whom the newspaper says so and so?" asked my mother. "Yes, signora, I am." "Well, we have brought you a little linen." The woman began to thank us and bless us, and could not make enough of it. Just then I noticed in one corner of the bare, dark room a boy kneeling in front of a chair, with his back turned towards us, who appeared to be writing, and he really was writing with his paper on the chair and his inkstand on the floor. How did he manage to write in the dark? While I was saying this to myself, I suddenly recognized the red hair and the coarse jacket of Crossi, the son of the vegetable peddler, the boy with the useless arm. I told this to my mother softly, while the woman was putting away the things. "Hush," replied my mother, "perhaps he will feel ashamed to see you giving alms to his mother. Don't speak to him." But at that moment Crossi turned around. I was embarrassed. He smiled, and then my mother gave me a push, so that I should run to him and embrace him. I did so. He rose and took me by the hand. "Here I am," his mother was saying in the meantime to my mother, "alone with this boy, my husband in America these 7 years, and I sick in addition, so that I can no longer make my rounds with my vegetables and earn a few cents. We have not even a table left for my poor Luigino to do his work on. When there was a bench down at the door, he could at least write on the bench, but that has been taken away. He has not even light enough to study without ruining his eyes. And it is a mercy that I can send him to school, since the city provides him with books and copybooks. Poor Luigino, who would be so glad to study. Unhappy woman that I am." My mother gave her all that she had in her purse, kissed the boy, and almost wept as we went out. And she had good cause to say to me, "Look at that poor boy. See how he is forced to work when you have every comfort, and yet study seems hard to you. Ah, Enrico, there is more merit in the work which he does in 1 day than in your work for a year. It is to such that the first prizes should be given." The School. Friday, 28th. Yes, study comes hard to you, my dear Enrico, as your mother says. I do not yet see you set out for school with that resolute mind and that smiling face which I should like. You are still unwilling. But listen, reflect a little. How poor and pitiable your day would be if you didn't go to school. At the end of a week you would beg with clasped hands that you might return there, for you would be eaten up with weariness and shame, disgusted with your sports and with your existence. Everybody studies now, my child. Think of the workmen who go to school in the evening after having toiled all the day. Think of the women, of the girls, of the people who go to school on Sunday after having worked all the week, of the soldiers who turn to their books and copybooks when they return exhausted from their drill. Think of the dumb and the blind who study nevertheless, and last of all think of the prisoners who also learn to read and write. Reflect in the morning when you set out, that at that very moment in your own city 30,000 other boys are going like yourself to shut themselves up in a room for 3 hours of study. Think of the army of boys who, at nearly this precise hour, are going to school in all countries. Behold them with your imagination, going through the lanes of quiet villages, through the streets of the noisy towns, along the shores of rivers and lakes, here beneath a burning sun, there amid fogs, in boats, in countries which are cut with canals, on horseback on the far-reaching plains, in sledges over the snow, through valleys and over hills, across forests and torrents, over the solitary paths of mountains, alone, in couplets, in groups, in long files, all with their books under their arms, clad in 1,000 ways, speaking 1,000 tongues, from the most remote schools in Russia, almost lost in the ice, to the furthermost schools of Arabia, shaded by palm trees, millions and millions, all going to learn the same things in 100 varied forms. Imagine this vast throng of boys of 100 races, this immense movement of which you form a part, and remember, if this movement were to cease, humanity would fall back into barbarism. This movement is the progress, the hope, the glory of the world. Courage, then, little soldier of the immense army. Your books are your arms. Your class is your squadron. The field of battle is the whole earth, and the victory is human civilization. Be not a cowardly soldier, my Enrico.
Your father.
The Little Patriot of Padua. The Monthly Story. Saturday, 29th. I will not be a cowardly soldier, no, but I should be much more willing to go to school if the master would tell us a story every day, like the one he told us this morning. "Every month," said he, "I shall tell you one. I shall give it to you in writing, and it will always be the tale of a fine and noble deed performed by a boy. This one is called The Little Patriot of Padua. Here it is. A French steamer set out from Barcelona, a city in Spain, for Genoa. There were on board Frenchmen, Italians, Spaniards, and Swiss. Among the rest was a lad of 11, poorly clad and alone, who always held himself aloof, like a wild animal, and stared at all with gloomy eyes. He had good reasons for looking at everyone with forbidding eyes. 2 years previous to this time his parents, peasants in the neighbourhood of Padua, had sold him to a company of mountebanks who, after they had taught him how to perform tricks by dint of blows and kicks and starving, had carried him all over France and Spain, beating him continually and never giving him enough to eat. On his arrival in Barcelona, being no longer able to endure ill treatment and hunger, and being reduced to a pitiable condition, he fled from his slave-master and had betaken himself for protection to the Italian council, who, moved with compassion, had placed him on board of this steamer, and had given him a letter to the guardsman of Genoa, who was to send the boy back to the parents who had sold him like a beast. The poor boy was weak and ragged. He had been put in the second-class cabin. Everyone stared at him. Some questioned him, but he made no reply, and seemed to hate and despise everyone, to such an extent had privation and suffering borne him down and saddened him. Nevertheless, 3 travellers, persisting in their questioning, succeeded in making him unloosen his tongue, and in a few rough words, a mixture of Venetian, French, and Spanish, he related his story. These 3 travellers were not Italian, but they understood him, and partly out of compassion, partly because they were excited with wine, they gave him a few coins, jesting with him and urging him on to tell them other things, and as several ladies entered the salon at the moment, they gave him some more money for the purpose of making a show, and cried, take this too, as they made the money rattle on the table. The boy pocketed it all, thanking them with a low voice and with his sad face, but with a look that was for the first time smiling and affectionate. Then he climbed into his berth, drew the curtain, and lay quiet, thinking over his affairs. With this money he would be able to purchase some good food on board, after having suffered for lack of bread for 2 years. He could buy a jacket as soon as he landed in Genoa, after having gone about clad in rags for 2 years, and he could also, by carrying it home, ensure for himself from his father and mother a kinder greeting than would fall to his lot if he arrived with empty pockets. This money was a little fortune for him, and he was taking comfort out of the thought behind the curtain of his berth, while the 3 travellers chatted away, as they sat around the dining table in the second-class salon. They were drinking and discussing their travels and the countries which they had seen, and from one topic to another they began to discuss Italy. One of them began to complain of the inns, another of the railways, and then, growing warmer, they all began to speak evil of everything. One would have preferred a trip to Lapland, another declared that he had found nothing but robbers and brigands in Italy, the third said that Italian officials do not know how to read. "It's an ignorant nation," continued the first. "A filthy nation," added the second. Exclaimed the third, meaning to say robbers, but he was not allowed to finish the word. A tempest of small coin came down upon their heads and shoulders, fell over the table and the floor with a great clatter. All 3 sprang up in a rage, looked up, and received another handful of coppers in their faces. "Take back your money," said the lad disdainfully, thrusting his head between the curtains of his berth. "I do not accept alms from those who insult my country." The Chimney Sweep, November 1st. Yesterday afternoon I went to the girls' school building near ours to give the story of the boy from Padua to Sylvia's teacher, who wished to read it. There are 700 girls there. Just as I arrived, they began to come out, all greatly rejoiced at the holiday of All Saints and All Souls, and here is a fine thing that I saw. Opposite the door of the school, on the other side of the street, with his sack and scraper, stood a very small chimney sweep, his face entirely black, with one arm resting against the wall, and his head supported on his arm, weeping and sobbing. 2 or 3 of the girls of the 2nd grade approached him and said, "What is the matter, that you weep like this?" But he made no reply and went on crying. "Come, tell us what is the matter with you, and why you are crying," the girls repeated. And then he raised his face from his arm, a baby face, and said through his tears that he had been to several houses to sweep their chimneys and had earned 30 soldi, and that he had lost them, that they had slipped through a hole in his pocket. And he showed the hole, and he did not dare to return home without the money. "The master will beat me," he said, sobbing, and again dropped his head upon his arm, like one in despair. The children stood and stared at him very seriously. In the meantime, other girls, large and small, poor girls and girls in the upper classes, with their satchels under their arms, had come up, and one large girl, who had a blue feather in her hat, pulled 2 soldi from her pocket, and said, "I have only 2 soldi, let us make a collection." "I have 2 soldi also," said another girl, dressed in red. "We shall certainly find 30 soldi among us all." And they began to call out, "Amalia, Luigia, Annina, a soldo, who has any soldi? Bring your soldi here." Several had soldi to buy flowers or copybooks, and they brought them. Some of the smaller girls gave centesimi, and the one with the blue feather collected all and counted them in a loud voice, 8, 10, 15. But more was needed. Then one larger than any of them, who seemed to be an assistant mistress, appeared, and gave half a lira, and all made much of her. 5 soldi were still lacking. "The girls in the 4th class are coming. They will have it," said one girl. The members of the 4th class came, and the soldiers showered down. All hurried forward eagerly, and it was beautiful to see that poor chimney sweep in the middle of all those many-colored dresses, of all that whirl of feathers, ribbons, and curls. The 30 soldi were already obtained, but more kept pouring in, and the very smallest who had no money made their way among the big girls and offered their bunches of flowers for the sake of giving something. All at once the portress came out and called, "The Signora Directress." The girls fled in all directions like a flock of sparrows, and then the little chimney sweep was visible, alone, in the middle of the street, wiping his eyes in perfect content, with his hands full of money, and the buttonholes of his jacket, his pockets, his hat full of flowers, and there were blossoms on the ground at his feet. The Day of the Dead, All Souls' Day, November 2nd. This day is sacred to the memory of the dead. Do you know, Enrico, that all you boys should on this day devote a thought to those who are dead? To those who have died for you, for boys and little children. How many have died, and how many are dying continually? Have you ever reflected how many fathers have worn out their lives in toil? How many mothers have descended to the grave before their time, worn out by the privations to which they have condemned themselves for the sake of sustaining their children? Do you know how many men have planted a knife in their hearts in despair at beholding their children in misery? How many women have drowned themselves, or have died of sorrow, or have gone mad through having lost a child? Think of all these dead on this day, Enrico. Think of how many schoolmistresses have died young, have pined away through the fatigues of the school, through love of the children, for whom they had not the heart to tear themselves away. Think of the doctors who have perished of contagious diseases, having bravely sacrificed themselves to cure the children. Think of all those who in shipwrecks, in fires, in famines, in moments of supreme danger, have yielded to infants the last morsel of bread, the last place of safety, the last rope of escape from the flames, to expire content with their sacrifice, since they preserved the life of a little innocent. Such dead as these are countless, Enrico. Every graveyard contains hundreds of these sainted beings who, if they could rise for a moment from their graves, would cry the name of a child for whom they gave up the joys of youth, the peace of old age, their affections, their learning, their life, wives of 20, men in the flower of their strength, octogenarians, youths, heroic and obscure martyrs from infancy, so grand and so noble that the earth does not produce as many flowers as should strew their graves. To such a degree are ye loved, O children. Think today on those dead with gratitude, and you will be kinder and more affectionate to all those who love you, and who toil for you, my dear, fortunate son, who on the day of the dead have as yet no one to grieve for. Your Mother. End of section 3.
Section number 4 of Heart, a Schoolboy's Journal. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Heart, a Schoolboy's Journal by Edmondo de Amicis. Translated by Isabel Florence Hapgood. November, Part 1. My Friend Garrone. Friday, November 4th. There were but 2 days of vacation, yet it seemed a long time without seeing Garrone. The more I know him, the better I like him, and so it is with all the rest, except with the overbearing, who have nothing to say to him, because he does not permit them to bully. Every time a big boy raises his hands against a little one, the little one shouts, "Garrone!" and the big one stops striking him. His father is an engine driver on the railway. Garrone began school late, because he was ill for 2 years. He is the tallest and the strongest of the class. He lifts a bench with one hand. He is always eating, and he is good. Whatever he is asked for, a pencil, rubber, paper, or penknife, he lends or gives it, and he neither talks nor laughs in school. He always sits perfectly still on a bench that is too narrow for him, with his spine curved forward, and his big head between his shoulders. And when I look at him, he smiles at me with his eyes half closed, as much to say, "Well, Enrico, are we friends?" He makes me laugh, because tall and broad as he is, he has a jacket, trousers, and sleeves which are too small for him, and too short, a cap which will not stay on his head, a threadbare cloak, coarse shoes, and a necktie which is always twisted into a cord. Dear Garrone! It needs but one glance in his face to inspire love for him. All the little boys like to be near his bench. He knows arithmetic well. He carries his books bound together with a strap of red leather. He has a knife with a mother-of-pearl handle, which he found in the field for military maneuvers last year. And one day he cut his finger to the bone, but no one in school knew about it, and he did not breathe a word about it at home for fear of alarming his parents. He lets us say anything to him in jest, and he never takes it ill, but woe to anyone who says to him that is not true, when he states a thing. Then fire flashes from his eyes, and he hammers down blows enough to split the bench. Saturday morning he gave a soldo to one of the upper first class, who was crying in the middle of the street because his own had been taken from him, and he could not buy his copybook. For the last 3 days he has been working over a letter of 8 pages with pen ornaments on the margins, for the Saint's Day of his mother, who often comes to get him, and who, like himself, is tall and large and sympathetic. The master is always glancing at him, and every time that he passes near him, he taps him on the neck with his hand, as though he were a good, peaceable young bull. I am very fond of him. I am happy when I press his big hand, which seems like a man's in mine. I am sure he would risk his life to save that of a comrade, that he would allow himself to be killed in his defense. So clearly can I read his eyes. And although he always seems to be grumbling with that big voice of his, one feels that it is a voice that comes from a gentle heart. The Charcoalman and the Gentleman. Monday, November 7th. Garrone would certainly never have said the words that Carlo Nobis spoke yesterday morning to Betty. Carlo Nobis is proud, because his father is a great gentleman, a tall gentleman, with a black beard, who is very serious, and who accompanies his son to school nearly every day. Yesterday morning, Nobis quarreled with Betty, one of the smallest boys, and the son of a charcoalman, and not knowing what retort to make because he was in the wrong, said to him loudly, "Your father is a tattered beggar." Betty reddened up to his very hair and said nothing, but the tears came to his eyes, and when he went home he repeated the words to his father. So the charcoal dealer, a little man who was black all over, made his appearance at the afternoon session, leading his boy by the hand in order to complain to the master. While he was making his complaint, and everyone was silent, the father of Nobis, who was taking off his son's coat at the entrance, as usual, entered on hearing his name pronounced, and asked an explanation. "This workman has come," said the master, "to complain that your son Carlo said this boy, your father, is a tattered beggar." Nobis's father frowned and colored slightly. Then he asked his son, Did you say that?" His son, who was standing in the middle of the school, with his head hanging in front of little Betty, made no reply. Then his father grasped him by one arm and pushed him forward, facing Betty, so that they nearly touched, and said to him, "Beg his pardon." The charcoal man tried to interpose, saying, "No, no." But the gentleman paid no heed to him, and repeated to his son, "Beg his pardon. Repeat my words. I beg your pardon for the insulting, foolish, ignoble words of which I uttered your father, whose hand my father would feel honored to grasp." The charcoal man made a gesture as to say, "I will not allow it." The gentleman did not heed him, and his son said slowly, in a very thread of a voice, without raising his eyes from the ground, "I beg your pardon for the insulting, foolish, ignoble words which I uttered against your father, whose hand my father would feel honored to grasp." Then the gentleman offered his hand to the charcoal man, who shook it vigorously. And then, with a sudden push, he thrust his son into the arms of Carlo Nobis. "Do me a favor to place them next to each other," said the gentleman to the master. The master put Betty on Nobis's bench. When they were seated, the father of Nobis bowed and went away. The charcoal man remained standing there and thought for several moments, gazing at the two boys side by side. Then he approached the bench and fixed upon Nobis a look expressive of affection and regret, as though he were desirous of saying something to him. But he did not. He stretched out his hand to bestow a caress upon him, but he did not dare, and merely stroked his brow with his large fingers. Then he made his way to the door, and turning round for one last look, he disappeared. "Fix what you have just seen firmly in your minds, boys," said the master. "This is the finest lesson of the year." My brother's schoolmistress, Thursday, November 10th. The son of the charcoal man had been a pupil of the schoolmistress Delcati, who had come to see my brother when he was ill, and who had made us laugh by telling us how 2 years ago the mother of his boy had brought to her house a big apronful of charcoal. Out of gratitude to her for having given the medal to her son, and the poor woman had persisted and had not been willing to carry the coal home again, and had wept when she was obliged to go away with her apron quite full. And she told us, also, of another good woman who had brought her a very heavy bunch of flowers, inside of which there was a little hoard of soldi. We had been greatly diverted in listening to her, and so my brother had swallowed his medicine, which he had not been willing to do before. How much patience is necessary with those boys of the lower first, all toothless like old men, who cannot pronounce their R's and S's, and one coughs, and another has the nosebleed, and another loses his shoes under the bench, and another bellows because he has pricked himself with his pen, and another one cries because he has bought copybook number 2 instead of number 1. 50 in a class who know nothing, and all of them with those flabby little hands, must be taught to write. They carry in their pockets bits of licorice, buttons, file corks, pounded bricks, all sorts of little things, and the teacher has to search them. But they hide these things even in their shoes, and they are not attentive. A fly enters through a window and throws them all into confusion. And in summer they bring grass into school, and hornbugs, which fly around in circles, or fall into the inkstand, and then streak the copybooks all over with ink. The schoolmistress has to play mother to all of them, to help them dress themselves, tie up their pricked fingers, pick up their caps when they drop them, watch to see that they do not exchange coats, and that they do not indulge in catcalls and shrieks. Poor schoolmistress! And then the mothers come to complain, "How come it, Signora, that my boy has lost his pen? How does it happen that mine learns nothing? Why is not my boy put on the roll of honor when he knows so much? Why don't you have that nail that has torn my perro's trousers taken out of the bench?" Sometimes my brother's teacher gets out of patience with the boys, and when she can resist no longer, she bites her finger to keep herself from dealing a blow. She loses temper, and then she repents and pets the child whom she has scolded. She sends a little rogue out of school, and then swallows her tears and flies into a rage with parents who make the little ones fast by way of punishment. Schoolmistress Delcati is young and tall, well-dressed, brown of complexion, and restless. She does everything as though on springs, is affected by a mere trifle, and at such times speaks with great tenderness. "But the children become attached to you, surely?" my mother said to her. "Many do," she replied, "but at the end of the year the majority of them pay no further heed to us. When they are with the masters, they are almost ashamed of having been with a woman teacher. After 2 years of cares, after having loved the child so much, it makes us feel sad to part from him. But we say to ourselves, 'Oh, I am sure of that one, he is fond of me.' But the vacation over, he comes back to school. I run to meet him. 'Oh, my child, my child!' And he turns his head away." Here the teacher interrupted herself. "But you will not do that, little one," she said, raising her humid eyes and kissing my brother. "You will not turn aside your head, will you? You will not deny your poor friend." My mother. Thursday, November 10th. In the presence of your brother's teacher, you failed to respect your mother. Let this never happen again, my Enrico. Never again. Your irreverent word pierced my heart like a point of steel. I thought of your mother when, years ago, she bent the whole of one night over your little bed, watching your breathing, weeping in her anguish, and with her teeth chattering with terror, because she thought she had lost you, and I feared that she would lose her reason. And at this thought, I felt a sentiment of horror at you. You to offend your mother who would give a year of happiness to spare you 1 hour of pain, who would beg for you, who would allow herself to be killed to save your life. Listen, Enrico. Fix this thought well in your mind. Reflect that you are destined to experience many terrible days in the course of your life. The most terrible will be that in which you lose your mother. 1,000 times, Enrico, after you are a man strong and inured in all fates, you will invoke her, oppressed with an intense desire to hear her voice, if but not for a moment, and to see once more her open arms, into which you can throw yourself, sobbing like a poor child, bereft of comfort and protection. How you will then recall every bitterness that you have caused her, and with what remorse will you pay for all, unhappy being? Hope for no peace in your life if you have caused your mother grief. You will repent. You will beg for her forgiveness. You will venerate her memory in vain. Conscience will give you no rest. That sweet and gentle image will always wear for you an expression of sadness and of reproach which will put your soul to torture. Oh, Enrico, beware. This is the most sacred of human affections. Unhappy he who tramples it underfoot. The assassin who respects his mother has still something honest and noble in his heart. The most glorious of men who grieves and offends her is but a vile creature. Never again let a harsh word issue from your lips for the being who gave you life. And if one should ever escape you, let it not be the fear of your father, but let it be the impulse of your soul which casts you at her feet, to beseech her that she will blot from your brow with the kiss of forgiveness the stain of ingratitude. I love you, my son. You are the dearest hope of my life. But I would rather see you dead than ungrateful to your mother. Go away for a little space. Offer me no more of your caresses. I should not be able to return them from my heart. Signed, your father.
My friend Coretti, Sunday, November 13th. My father forgave me, but I was somewhat downcast. So my mother sent me with the porter's largest son to take a walk on the Corso. Halfway down the Corso, as we were passing a cart which was standing in front of a shop, I heard someone call my name. I turned around. It was Coretti, my schoolmate, with his chocolate-colored clothes and a cat-skin cap, all in perspiration, but merry, with a big load of wood on his shoulders. A man who was standing in the cart was handing him an armful of wood at a time, which he took and carried into his father's shop, where he piled it up in the greatest haste. "What are you doing, Coretti?" I asked him. "Don't you see?" he answered, reaching out his arms to receive the load. "I am reviewing my lessons." I laughed, but he seemed to be serious, and having grasped that armful of wood, he began to repeat as he ran. The conjunction of the verb consists in its variations according to number and person. And then throwing down the wood and piling it, according to the time to which the action refers, and turning to the cart for another armful, according to the mode in which the action is enunciated. It was our grammar lesson for the following day. "Isn't this a good scheme?" he said. "I am putting my time to use. My father has gone off on business. My mother is ill. It falls on me to do the unloading. In the meantime, I'm going over my grammar lesson. It is a hard lesson today. I could not succeed in getting it into my head. My father said he'd be here at 7 o'clock to give you your money," he said to the man with the cart. The cart drove off. "Come into the shop for a minute," Coretti said to me. I went in. It was a large room full of piles of wood and faggots, with a steel yard on one side. "This is a busy day, I can assure you," resumed Coretti. "I have to do my work by fits and starts. I was writing my phrases when some customers came in. I went to writing again, and behold, that cart arrived. I have already made 2 trips to the wood market and the Piazza Vienzia this morning. My legs are so tired that I can hardly stand, and my hands are all swollen. I should be in a pretty pickle if I had to draw." And as he spoke, he set about sweeping up the dry leaves and the straw which covered the brick-paved floor. "But where do you do your work, Coretti?" I inquired. "Not here, certainly," he replied. "Come and see." And he led me into a little room behind the shop, which served as a kitchen and dining room, with a table in one corner, on which there were books and copybooks, and work which had been begun. "Here it is," he said. "I left the second answer unfinished. Leather is used for shoes and belts, and oh yes, and valises." And taking his pen, he began to write in his fine hand. "Is there anyone here?" came a call from the shop at that moment. It was a woman who had come to buy some little faggots. "Here I am," replied Coretti, and he sprang out, weighed the faggots, took the money, ran to a corner to enter the sale into a shabby old account book, and returned to his work, saying, "Let's see if I can finish that sentence." And he wrote traveling bags and knapsacks for soldiers. "Oh, my poor coffee is boiling over," he exclaimed, and ran to the stove to take the coffee pot from the fire. "It is coffee for my mamma," he said. "I had to learn how to make it. Wait a while, and we will carry it to her. She will be glad to see you. She has been in bed a whole week." Conjunction of the verb. I always scald my fingers with this coffee pot. What is there that I can add after the soldiers' knapsacks? Something more is needed, and I can think of nothing. Come to Mamma. He opened a door, and we entered another small room. There, Coretti's mother lay in a big bed with a white kerchief wound round her head. "Here is your coffee, Mamma," he said, "and this is one of my schoolmates." "Ah, brave little master," the woman said to me. "You have come to visit the sick, have you?" Meanwhile, Coretti was arranging the pillows behind his mother's back, straightening the bedclothes, brightening up the fire, and driving the cat off the chest of drawers. "Do you want anything else, Mamma?" he asked, as he took the cup from her. "Have you taken the 2 spoonfuls of syrup? When it is all gone, I will make a trip to the apothecary's. The wood is unloaded. At 4 o'clock I will put the meat on the stove, as you told me, and when the butter woman passes, I will give her those 8 soldi. Everything will go on well, so don't give it a thought." "Thank you, my son," replied the woman. "That will do. Poor boy, he thinks of everything." She insisted that I take a lump of sugar, and then Coretti showed me a little picture, the photograph of his father dressed as a soldier, with the medal for bravery which he had won in 1866 in the troop of Prince Umberto. He had the same face as his son, with the same vivacious eyes and merry smile. We went back to the kitchen. "I have found the last answer," said Coretti, and he added on his copybook, "Harness is also made of it. The rest I will do this evening. I shall sit up later. How happy you are to have time to study and to go to walk, too." And still gay and active, he re-entered the shop, and began to place pieces of wood on the horse, and to saw them, saying, "This is gymnastics. It is quite different from the throw your arms forward. I want my father to find all this wood sawed when he gets home. How glad he will be! The worst part of it is that after sawing, I make T's and L's look like snakes, so the teacher says. What am I to do? I shall tell him that I have to move my arms about. The important thing is to have Mamma get well quickly. She is better today, thank heaven. I will study my grammar tomorrow morning at cockcrow. Oh, here's the cart with the logs. To work!" A small cart laden with logs halted in front of the shop. Coretti ran out to speak to the man, then returned. "I cannot keep your company any longer now," he said. "Farewell until tomorrow. You did right to come and hunt me up. A pleasant walk to you, lucky fellow." And pressing my hand, he ran to take the first log, and began once more to trot back and forth between the cart and the shop, with a face as fresh as a rose beneath the catskin cap, and so alert that it was a pleasure to see him. "Lucky fellow," he had said to me. "Ah, no, Coretti, no. You are the more fortunate, because you study and work too, because you are of use to your father and mother, because you are better, 100 times better, and braver than I, my dear schoolmate." The Principal, Friday, November 18th. Coretti was pleased this morning because his master of the 2nd class, Coatti, a big man with a huge head of curly hair, a great black beard, big dark eyes, and a voice like a cannon, had come to assist in the work of the monthly examination. He is always threatening the boys that he will break them in pieces and carry them by the nape of the neck to the police station. And he makes all sorts of frightful faces, though he never punishes anyone, but always smiles the while behind his beard so that no one can see it. There are 8 masters in all, including Coati, and a little beardless assistant who looks like a boy. There is one master of the 4th class who is lame and goes wrapped up in a big woolen scarf, and who is always suffering from pains which he contracted when he was a teacher in the country, in a damp school where the walls were dripping with moisture. Another of the teachers of the 4th is old and perfectly white-haired, and has been a teacher of the blind. There is one well-dressed master, with eyeglasses and a blonde mustache, who is called Little Lawyer, because while he was teaching he studied law and took his diploma, and he also got up a book to teach how to write letters. The one who teaches gymnastics is of a soldierly type, and was with Garibaldi, and has on his neck a scar from a saber wound received at the Battle of Milazzo. Then there is the principal, who is tall and bald, and wears gold spectacles, and has a gray beard that flows down upon his breast. He dresses entirely in black, and is always buttoned up to the chin. He is so kind to the boys that when they enter his office, all in a tremble, because they have been summoned to receive a reproof, he does not scold them, but takes them by the hand, and tells them so many reasons why they ought not to behave so, and why they should be sorry, and promise to be good. And he speaks in such a kind manner, and in so gentle a voice, that they all come out with red eyes, more confused than if they'd been punished. Poor headmaster! He is always the first at his post in the morning, waiting for the scholars and lending an ear to the parents. And when the other masters are ready on their way home, he is still hovering about the school, and looking out that the boys do not get under the carriage wheels, or hang about the streets to stand on their heads, or fill their bags with sand or shoes. And the moment he appears at the corner, so tall and black, flocks of boys scamper off in all directions, leaving their games of copper and marbles, and he threatens them from afar with his forefinger, with his sad and loving air. No one has ever seen him smile, my mother says, since the death of his son, who was a volunteer in the army. He always keeps the latter's portrait before his eyes, on a little table in his room. He wanted to go away after this misfortune. He wrote his resignation to the municipal council, and kept it always on his table, putting off sending it from day to day, because it grieved him to leave the boys. The other day he seemed undecided, and my father, who was in the director's room with him, was just saying him, "What a shame it is that you are going away, Signor Director." When a man came in to put down the name of a boy who was to be transferred from another schoolhouse to ours, because he had changed his residence. At the sight of this boy, the principal made a gesture of astonishment, gazed at him for a while, looked at the portrait that he keeps on his little table, and then stared at the boy again as he drew him between his knees and made him hold up his head. The boy resembled his dead son. The principal said, "It is all right," wrote down his name, dismissed the father and son, and remained lost in thought. "What a pity you are going away," repeated my father. The headmaster took up his resignation, tore it in two, and said, "I shall remain." End of section 4. Recorded by Julina Goodell, Fairfax, Virginia. Section number 5 of Heart, a Schoolboy's Journal. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain.
For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Heart, A Schoolboy's Journal by Edmondo de Amicis. Translated by Isabel Florence Hapgood.
November, Part 2.
The Soldiers. Tuesday, November 22nd. His son had been a volunteer in the army when he died. This is the reason why the principal always goes to the corso to see the soldiers pass when we come out of school. Yesterday, a regiment of infantry was passing, and 50 boys began to dance around the band, singing and beating time with their rulers on their bags and satchels. We were standing in a group on the sidewalk watching them. Garrone, squeezed into his clothes, which were too tight for him, was biting at a large piece of bread. Votini, the well-dressed boy, who always wears Florentine plush. Precossi, the son of the blacksmith with his father's jacket, the Calambrian Muratorino. Crossi, with his red head. Franti, with his bold face. And Robetti, the son of the artillery captain, the boy who saved the child from the omnibus, and who now walks on crutches. Franti burst into a derisive laugh in the face of a soldier who was limping. But all at once he felt a man's hand on his shoulder. He turned around. It was the principal. "Take care," said the master to him. "Jeering at a soldier when he is in the ranks, when he can neither avenge himself nor reply, is like insulting a man whose hands are tied. It is cowardly." Franti disappeared. The soldiers were marching by fours, all perspiring and covered with dust, and their guns were gleaming in the sun. The principal said, "You ought to wish the soldiers well, boys. They are our defenders, who would go to be killed for our sakes. If a foreign army were to menace our country tomorrow, they are boys too. They are not many years older than you, and they too go to school. And they are poor and rich among them, just as there are among you. And they come from every part of Italy. See if you can recognize them by their faces. Sicilians are passing, and Sardinians, and Neapolitans, and Lombards. This is an old regiment, one of those who fought in 1848. They are not the same soldiers, but the flag is still the same. How many died for our country around the banner 20 years before you were born?" "Here it is," said Garrone. And in fact, not far off, the flag was visible, advancing above the heads of the soldiers. "Do one thing, my sons," said the headmaster. "Make your scholars salute, with your hand to your brow, when the tricolor passes." The flag borne by an officer passed before us, all tattered and faded, and with the medals attached to the staff. We put our hands to our foreheads, all together. The officer looked at us with a smile, and returned our salute with his hand. "Bravo, boys," said someone behind us. We turned to look. It was an old man who wore in his buttonhole the blue ribbon of the Crimean campaign. A pensioned officer. "Bravo! You have done a noble deed." In the meantime, the band of the regiment had made a turn at the end of the corso. Surrounded by a throng of boys, and 100 merry shouts accompanied the blasts of the trumpets like a war song. "Bravo!" repeated the old officer, as he gazed upon us. "He who respects the flag when he is little will know how to defend it when he is grown up." Nellie's Protector, Wednesday, November 23rd. Nelly, too, poor little hunchback, was looking at the soldiers yesterday, but with an air as though he was thinking, I could never be a soldier. He is good, and he studies, but he is so puny and wan, and he breathes with difficulty. He always wears a long apron of shining black cloth. His mother is a little blonde woman who dresses in black. She always comes to get him at the end of school, so that he may not come out in the crowd with the others, and she pets him. At first, many of the boys ridiculed him and thumped him on the back with their bags, because he is so unfortunate as to be a hunchback. But he never offered any resistance, nor said anything to his mother, in order not to give her the pain of knowing that her son was the laughing stock of his companions. They jeered at him, and he cried quietly, with his head laid against the bench. But one morning, Garrone jumped up and said, "The first person who touches Nelly will get such a lick from me that he will spin round 3 times. Franti paid no attention to him. The blow was given, and from that time forth no one ever touched Nelly again. The master placed Garrone near him on the same bench. They have become friends. Nelly has grown very fond of Garrone. As soon as he enters the schoolroom, he looks to see if Garrone is there. He never goes away without saying, "Goodbye, Garrone," and Garrone does the same with him. When Nelly drops a pen or book under the bench, Garrone stoops quickly to prevent his stooping and tiring himself, and picks it up for him. Then he helps him to put his things in his bag and to twist himself into his coat. For this Nelly loves him and gazes at him constantly, and when the master praises Garrone, he is as pleased as though he had been praised himself. Nelly must at last have told his mother all about the ridicule of the early days, and what they made him suffer, and about the comrade who defended him, and how he had grown fond of the latter. For this is what happened this morning. The master had sent me to carry to the director, half an hour before the close of school, a program of the lesson. And while I was in the office, a small blonde woman dressed in black came in. It was Nelly's mother. She asked, "Signor Director, is there a boy named Garrone in the class with my son?" "Yes," replied the headmaster. "Will you have the goodness to let him come here for a moment? I have a word to say to him." The principal called the porter and sent him to the school, and after a minute Garrone appeared in the threshold with his big, close-cropped head, in perfect amazement. No sooner did she catch sight of him than the woman flew to meet him, threw her arms around him, and kissed him on the head, saying, "You are Garrone, the friend of my little son, the protector of my poor child. It is you, my dear, brave boy. It is you." Then she searched hastily in all her pockets and in her purse, and finding nothing, she detached a chain with a small cross from her neck, and put it on Garrone's neck under his necktie, and said to him, "Take it. Wear it in memory of me, my dear boy, in memory of Nelly's mother, who thanks and blesses you." The head of the class, Friday, November 25th. Garrone attracts the love of all. De Rossi, the admiration. De Rossi has taken the first medal. He will always be the first. This year, also no one can compete with him. All recognize his superiority in all points. He is first in arithmetic, in grammar, in composition, in drawing. He understands everything at a glance. He has a marvelous memory. He succeeds in everything without effort, It seems as though study were play to him. The teacher said to him yesterday, "You have received great gifts from God. Be careful not to squander them." And besides, he is tall and handsome, a great crown of golden curls. He is so nimble he can leap over a bench by resting one hand on it. And he already understands fencing. He is 12 years old and the son of a merchant. He is always dressed in blue, with gilt buttons. He is always lively, merry, gracious to all, and helps us as much as he can in examinations. No one has ever dared to play a trick on him or call him names. Nobis and Franti alone took askance at him, and Voltini darts envy from his eyes. But he does not even perceive it. All smile at him and take his hand or his arm when he goes about in his graceful way to collect the work. He gives away illustrated papers, drawings, everything that is given to him at home. He has made a little geographical chart of Calabria for the Calabrian lad.
And he gives everything with a smile without paying any heed to it, like a grand gentleman.
And without favorism for anyone. It is impossible not to envy him, not to feel smaller than he in everything. Ah, I too envy him, like Voltini, and I feel a bitterness, almost a certain scorn for him, sometimes when I am striving to do my work at home, and think that he has already finished his correctly, at the same moment, and without fatigue. But then, when I return to school, and behold him so handsome, so smiling and triumphant, and how frankly and confidently he replies to the master's questions, and how courteous he is, and how the others all like him, then all the bitterness, all scorn, departs from my heart. And I am ashamed of having felt that way. I should like to be always near him at such times. I should like to be able to do all of my school tasks with him, for his presence, his voice, inspire me with courage, with a will to work, with cheerfulness and pleasure. The teacher has given him the monthly story to copy, which will be read tomorrow. The Little Vedette of Lombardy.
He copied it this morning and was so much affected by that heroic deed
that his face was all aflame, his eyes moist, and his lips trembling.
I gazed at him.
How handsome and noble he was! With what pleasure would I not have said frankly to his face, "Dear Rossi, you are worth more than I in everything. You are a man in comparison with me. I respect you and admire you." The Little Vedette of Lombardy. Monthly Story. Saturday, November 26th. In the year 1859, during the war for the liberation of Lombardy, a few days after the battle of Sofranino and San Martino, won by the French and Italians over Austrians. On a beautiful morning in the month of June, a little band of cavalry of Saluzzo was proceeding at a slow pace along the retired path in the direction of the enemy, and exploring the country attentively. The troop was commanded by an officer and a sergeant, and all were gazing into the distance ahead of them with eyes fixed, and prepared at any moment to see the uniforms of the enemy's advance posts gleam white before them through the trees. In this order they arrived at a rustic cabin, surrounded by ash trees, in front of which stood a solitary boy, about 12 years old, who was removing the bark from a small branch with a knife in order to make himself a stick. From one window of the little house floated a large tri-colored flag. There was no one inside. The peasants had fled after hanging out the flag for fear of the Austrians. As soon as the lad saw the cavalry, he flung aside his stick and raised his cap. He was a handsome boy with a bold face, large blue eyes, and long golden hair. He was in his shirt sleeves, and his breast was bare. "What are you doing here?" the officer asked him, reining in his horse. "Why did you not flee with your family?" "I have no family," replied the boy. "I am a foundling. I do a little work for everybody. I stayed here to see the war." "Have you seen any Austrians pass?" "No, not for these 3 days." The officer paused a while in thought. Then he leaped from his horse, leaving his soldiers there, with their faces turned towards the foe. He entered the house and mounted to the roof. The house was low. From the roof only a small tract of country was visible. "It will be necessary to climb the trees," said the officer, and descended.
Just in front of the garden plot rose a very lofty and slender ash tree,
which was rocking its crest in the sky. The officer stood thinking a moment, gazing now at the tree, and again at the soldiers. Then all of a sudden he asked the lad, "Is your sight good, you monkey?" "Mine," replied the boy. "I can spy a sparrow a mile away." "Are you good for a climb to the top of this tree?" "To the top of this tree? I'll be up there in half a minute." "And will you be able to tell me what you see up there? If there are Austrian soldiers in that direction, clouds of dust, gleaming guns, horses?" "Certainly, I shall." "What do you ask for this service?" "What do I ask?" said the lad, smiling. "Nothing." "A fine thing indeed. Now, if it were for the Germans, I wouldn't do it on any terms. But for our men, I am a Lombard." "Good. Then up with you." "Wait a minute, until I take off my shoes." He pulled off his shoes, tightened the girth of his trousers, flung his cap on the grass, and clasped the trunk of the ash. "Take care now," exclaimed the officer,
making a movement to hold him back, as though seized with a sudden terror.
The boy turned to look at him, with his handsome blue eyes, as though to question him. "No matter," said the officer. "Up with you." Up went the lad like a cat. "Keep watch ahead," shouted the officer to the soldiers. In a few moments the boy was at the top of the tree,
twined around the trunk,
with his legs among the leaves, but his body displayed to view, and the sun beating down on his blond head, which seemed like gold. The officer could hardly see him, so small did he seem. "Look straight ahead and far away," shouted the officer. The lad, in order to see better, removed his right hand from the tree and shaded his eyes with it. "What do you see?" asked the officer. The boy bent his head toward him, and making a speaking trumpet of his hand, replied, "2 men, on horseback, on the white road." "At what distance from here?" "Half a mile." "Are they moving?" "They are standing still." "What else do you see?" asked the officer, after a momentary silence. "Look to the right." The boy looked to the right. Then he said, "Near the cemetery, among the trees, there is something glittering. It seems to be bayonets." "Do you see men?" "No, they must be hidden in the grain." At that moment, the sharp whiz of a bullet passed high up in the air and died away in the distance behind the house. "Come down, my lad," shouted the officer. "They have seen you. I don't want anything more. Come down." "I am not afraid," replied the boy. "Come down," repeated the officer. "What else do you see to the left?" "To the left?" "Yes, to the left." The lad turned his head to the left. At that moment, another whistle, more acute and lower than the first, cut the air. The boy was startled. "Deuce take them!" he exclaimed. "They actually are aiming at me!" The bullet had passed a short distance from him. "Down!" shouted the officer, angrily and commandingly. "I'll come down presently," replied the boy. "But the tree shelters me. Don't fear. You want to know what there is on the left?" "Yes, on the left," answered the officer. "But come down." "On the left," shouted the lad, turning his body in that direction. "Yonder, where there is a chapel, I think I see—" A third fierce whistle passed through the air, and almost at the same instant the boy was seen to descend, catching for a moment at the trunk and branches, and then falling headlong with arms outspread. "Curse them!" exclaimed the officer, running up. The boy landed on the ground, upon his back, and lay there with arms open and motionless. A stream of blood flowed from his left side. The sergeant and 2 soldiers leapt from their horses. The officer bent over and opened his shirt. The ball had entered his left lung. "He is dead," exclaimed the officer. "No, he still lives," replied the sergeant. "Ah, poor boy, brave boy," cried the officer. "Courage, courage!" But while he was saying courage, he was pressing his handkerchief on the wound. The boy rolled his eyes wildly and dropped his head back. He was dead. The officer turned pale and stood for a moment gazing at him. He laid him down carefully on his cloak upon the grass, then rose and stood looking at him. The sergeant and 2 soldiers also stood motionless, gazing upon him. The rest were facing the direction of the enemy. "Poor boy," repeated the officer. "Poor, brave boy." He approached the house, removed the tricolor from the window, and spread it like a shroud over the little dead boy, leaving his face uncovered. The sergeant collected the dead boy's shoes, his cap, his little stick, and his knife, and placed them beside him. They stood for a few moments longer in silence. Then the officer turned to the sergeant and said to him, "We will send the ambulance for him. He died as a soldier. The soldiers shall bury him." Having said this, he threw a kiss to the dead boy and shouted, "To horse!" All sprang into the saddle. The troop drew together and resumed its road. And a few hours later, the little dead boy received the honors of war. At sunset, the whole line of the Italian advance posts marched forward toward the foe, and along the same road which had been traversed in the morning by the detachment of cavalry. There, processed in 2 files, a heavy battalion of sharpshooters, who a few days before had valiantly watered the hill of San Martino with blood. The news of the boy's death had already spread along the soldiers before they had left the encampment. The path, flanked by a rivulet, ran a few paces distant from the house. When the first officers of the battalion caught sight of the little boy stretched at the foot of the ash tree and covered with the tricolor banner, they made the salute to it with their swords, and one of them bent over the bank of the streamlet, which was covered with flowers at that spot, and plucked a couple of blossoms and threw them on it. Then all the sharpshooters, as they passed, plucked flowers and threw them on the body. In a few minutes the boy was covered with flowers, and officers and soldiers all saluted him as they passed by. "Bravo, little Lombard! Farewell, my lad! I salute thee, Goldlocks! Hurrah! Glory! Farewell!"
One officer tossed him his medal for valor. Another went and kissed his brow,
and flowers continued to rain down on his bare feet, on his blood-stained breast, on his golden head. And there he lay asleep on the grass, enveloped in his flag, with a white and almost smiling face, as though he heard the salutes, and was glad that he had given his life for his Lombardy. The Poor. Tuesday, November 29th. To give one's life for one's country, as the Lombard boy did, is a great virtue. But you must not neglect the lesser virtues, my son. This morning, as you walked in front of me, when we were returning from school, you passed near a poor woman who was holding between her knees a thin, pale child, and who asked alms of you. You looked at her and gave her nothing, and yet you had some coppers in your pocket. Listen, my son. Do not accustom yourself to pass carelessly by poverty, which stretches out its hand to you, and far less before a mother who asks a copper for her child. Reflect that the child may be hungry. Think of the agony of that poor woman. Picture to yourself the sob of despair of your mother. If she were some day forced to say, "Enrico, I cannot give you even bread today." When I give a soldo to a beggar, and he says to me, "God preserve your health, and the health of all belonging to you," you cannot understand the sweetness which these words produce in my heart, the gratitude that I feel for that poor man. It seems to me that such a good wish must surely keep one in good health for a long time. And I return home content, and think, "Oh, that poor man has returned to me very much more than I gave him." Well, cause me sometimes to hear that good wish merited by you. Draw a soldo from your little purse now and then, and let it fall into the hand of a blind man without means of subsistence, of a mother without bread, of a child without a mother. The poor love the alms of boys, because it does not humiliate them, and because boys, who stand in need of everything, resemble themselves. You see that there are always poor people around the schoolhouses. The alms of a man is an act of charity, but that of a child is at one and the same time an act of charity and a caress. Do you understand? It is as though a soldo and a flower fell from your hand together. Reflect that you lack nothing and that they lack everything, that while you aspire to be happy, they are content simply with not dying. Reflect that it is a horror, in the midst of so many palaces, among the streets thronged with carriages, and children clad in velvet, that there should be women and children who have nothing to eat. To have nothing to eat! Oh God! Boys like you, as good as you, as intelligent as you, who, in the midst of a great city, have nothing to eat, like wild beasts lost in a desert. Oh, never again, Enrico, pass a mother who is begging without placing a soldo in her hand. Signed, your mother. End of section 5. Read by Julina Goodell, Fairfax, Virginia.